Hey there! Welcome to Live Noggin. I'm Pat, the co-creator of Life Noggin and Blocko's dad.
And I'm Keith, the president of Lifespan.io, the nonprofit that powers Life Noggin.
This is the Life Noggin podcast, where members of the Life Noggin team talk about the science behind movies, TV shows, and happenings in the news. We also brainstorm video ideas with the audience, so the chat can shape future Life Noggin episodes.
Today, we're discussing the Dune franchise and all the different science topics related to it.
It's a fun and nerdy convo, and we actually realize there are so many video ideas that can come from the Dune movies. Spoilers ahead, just as a heads up. Enjoy this episode of Live Noggin.
What if in a split second the Earth doubled in size? You know there is a reason your nose started to bleed. No single food has every nutrient you need. This is Life Noggin, an animated education channel that will satisfy even the most intense craving for information.
I guess to talk about, maybe we could talk about the spice a little bit and what kind of the analogs might be. So if I remember right, in the books, they said it's just sort of tastes like cinnamon, it kind of looks like cinnamon. But obviously, it has all these interesting effects in the book. It could sort of give you heightened senses, sort of visions of the future. It turns your eyes blue. That's obviously the key kind of visual. Interesting also to note that idea has been ripped off in a lot of other media. Like in Final Fantasy VII, the Mako turns your eyes kind of like that blue-green. So it's clearly inspired by Dune. And I hesitate to say that there's real world analogs for exactly that, obviously, including the psychic abilities and space folding stuff. But, there are things like the corticosteroid prednisone that has some of the capabilities of it. It can cause a turning blue of the eyes called blue sclera, can cause hallucinations and heightened senses. I think it also makes your heart freak out. So that's a downside. So, and it's kind of particulate in a sense, like spice. So that's something that I guess currently you could say is the most similar thing to spice. But this idea of just a cognitive enhancing substance fits with the kind of emerging area of, I guess, neurotropics, which are basically, modafinil, Adderall, things like this, that are designed to basically heighten your senses. Obviously, they're not exactly to the same level of Dune. But the question sort of becomes, with refinements, could we get something that more closely approximates spice? And, do you think that would be a cool thing? Do you think that's something that's exciting or dangerous? Or does a future with heightened augmented humans scare you or excite you? Discuss.
Well,
chat as well.
yeah, please. If there's anything we're talking about, chat, please feel free. Leave your opinions there. I already think humans are capable of incredible things, good and bad. Now, having something that unlocks full potential of your capabilities is kind of scary to me. Of course, I want to be excited about it. I want to be excited about a future where humans can do so much more. You also have to take the good with the bad there, I think. Because you can correct me if I'm wrong, that spice allows you to, they use it to chart courses throughout the universe, right? But in the correct hands, it allows you to see some future possibilities. I don't know if humans should do that. Wasn't there a whole movie about predicting crimes before they happen? What was it called, Keith?
Minority Report. Pre-crime, right?
Pre-crime.
But yeah, this is actually an interesting idea because it's also worth noting that in the book, in the 1980s version of the movie of Dune with Kyle MacLachlan, which is kind of funny, although I still like it. It very much feels like it's a typical hero tale. Here's the Paul Atreides' his rise to power, and he achieves vengeance, and it's great. The music is triumphant. But in this newer series of movies by Denis Villeneuve, and also, in my opinion, what the original book's tone was, it was kind of like an anti-epic. It's very clear that the through line is that Paul's actually not a hero, and this whole thing is actually kind of bad. And part of that, I think, is almost this idea of being able to sense the future is actually kind of terrible in this way, at least in the way that they painted it in Dune, because it causes all these free will issues. So Paul, if I remember right, and I think they call it the prescience in the book. By the way, if we do any spoilers, we'll try to call it out. And I think our animator has a prescience alert if that happens. But it's like at every moment, Paul can sort of sense like every single possible reality of like, what happens if I drink the cup from the right side of my mouth or the left side of my mouth, and like how the entire universe is changing. It's almost like that Rick and Morty episode when like Morty gets the powers and he's trying to like arrive at a specific future, but he's like trying to like, change every moment of his life so he can end up with Jessica. And it's just like completely like horrifying. So my point is that they don't paint it at like seeing the future is awesome. They paint it like seeing the future is potentially like really paralyzing and scary. And like, don't get me wrong, I'd still like to have psychic powers, but I'm just saying that this was definitely the flavor of psychic powers that was presented in Dune. And the one thing that I will say to kind of make it more personal is, I'm a little bit on the autism spectrum. So I don't know if this is just a me kind of thing, but when I was younger, I would feel this kind of decision paralysis sometimes when I'd pull like one soda out of the refrigerator and I'd be suddenly paralyzed, but like the entire course of my life is going to change based on whether it was this soda or that soda. And be like, am I grabbing the right soda? So I don't know if anyone else.
That happens to me like constantly. Like I'm always thinking about like what decision, like what this will lead to when I make that choice. And like, yeah, you can get like, it's debilitating sometimes when you think about all the like the future possibilities. So I can only imagine seeing the entire future, seeing like every possibility, and also seeing ones that are frightening. They're terrifying. They're things where your loved ones are going through like atrocities, and you want to prevent that, obviously. I'm also realizing the how Dune probably influenced Star Wars, like right, like that that is very clearly also the plot of one of the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, you're gonna pull me down a rabbit hole here, but I think Space Boy in the desert gets psychic powers using their voice, etc. Like those are obviously like clear, homages at the very least. But it's just worth noting that, and I'm not breaking any news by saying this, that happens a lot in media, and I think it's a shame that the public at large sometimes doesn't know where like the origins of something that they think is awesome is actually coming from. So I'll just come up with two other random examples here, right? So one of them on the music side is the musician Kate Bush, who's like a British musician that was popular in the 80s. When I discovered her, I was like, oh my God, like Lady Gaga's like totally taking parts of her act, and like Sarah McLachlan and Tori Amos and like all these other artists that I liked. I'm like, oh, it all like has its root in Kate Bush, like clearly. And on the media side, I highly recommend that everybody reads the book Neuromancer by William Gibson, which totally was like, The Matrix, Strange Days, Minority Report, all of these like very, very famous movies and books. They all are just basically cribbing like a specific part of Neuromancer and like riffing off of it. So I think like that might be a fun maybe video series, like to kind of try to go back to find those kind of like well springs of any particular area and be like, this is how Neuromancer inspired everything you love. Like this is how Kate Bush inspired the music you love, etc.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of want to explore it a little further. I would love. We talked about this a while ago, and chat, let me know if you think this would be good to make a video on what people were writing about in books or making movies, TV shows, whatever. What were people predicting the future was going to be like, and how correct were they? Like what were they? We did a video on like what people believed in the 50s and the 20s. I think we did a video on like science fiction predictions. But I'd love to do more of that because I think it's so fascinating just to see how like I was saying before in the beginning of the stream, like someone in 1965 is writing all this and like creating this about what the future might look, the very, very, very far off future, mind you. And like I don't know if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You were reading this stuff and going like, yeah, okay, cool, that sounds great. Like let's try to make that happen. Or if they're coming off of some other like just a wild idea. But I like to explore the past to see how it connects to now. I'm curious to know if you guys think that would be a good like series.
Yeah, that reminds me of I think it's the magazine Scientific American. They have like a column, I think, every month that just kind of shows like whatever the current column was like 80 years ago or whatever, which is always fun to see like how wildly off some of them were, and sometimes how accurate. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. Retrofuturism is always fun.
Keith, you want to touch a little bit on the memory enhancement?
Yes. So we had already talked about neurotropics a little bit, like prednisone and well, that's more of a
Mhm.
corticosteroid, but supplements that might affect your mind, like modafinil and Adderall. But another aspect that I believe was worked into the story of the mentats, the human computers, is basically the ability to kind of remember everything and recall everything perfectly and do complex calculations. So that crosses over into what you're talking about here, Pat, which is basically an old technique that I think was originally kind of attributed to like Greek poets. Was it the something of the loci method of the loci, right? Which is basically what we now call like memory palace. So this, this is a whole rabbit hole that you go down, and people like compete in this stuff like it's the Olympics, which is pretty crazy. But long story short, there's certain techniques that you can do to basically improve memorizing things. So as an example, the human brain is naturally geared towards like spatial memory. Obviously, there's like an evolutionary reason why it makes sense for us to think of things in terms of how they're related to each other physically and pathfinding and all that sort of stuff. So because of that, if I was going to give you a list of like 10 different things to remember, random words, or make sure you do this today, Pat, etc., it's hard to remember more than 7 things. But if you can kind of weave them together into a narrative where you can make pictures out of them, like, okay, if you told me to pick up a basketball and say hi to my grandmother and get some spaghetti, right? It's much easier for me to remember if I remember my grandmother playing basketball, like chowing down on some spaghetti, and like keeping that image in my mind will make it much easier for me to remember those 3 things. And then you can just go like the people who are like really, really good at this almost literally construct kind of like a mental palace where they're like literally putting, different memories in different rooms and next to each other and creating these stories and all that sort of stuff. So basically, it seems like being mentat in Dune is combining like a super version of this with neurotropics.
I get impressed when people can do basic math right away in their head. So that's what when I'm when people can do that and like beat the calculator, I'm just picturing the visual in Dune where their eyes are rolling back and they're like computing that and then they like come back. It's interesting that those kind of like the mind mapping technique and people that are like speed readers or have like the photographic memory, like those people exist. Those people have already been doing this for years and years and years and years. That there's just before we tap into any spice or mind altering substances, like we should probably be trying to understand the brain like fully as we have access to it like now, because there's clearly untapped potential just without doing any of the mind altering substances. I feel like
I'd be curious if in the chat, if anyone can post if you have any experience, either doing any kind of brain enhancing technique like we're talking about, or if you had any experiences on any kind of supplements or drugs, any vision quests out there. Definitely let us know. I think something like that could be a fun food for a video. And then also on the memory palace stuff, I think we could probably even do a video where we kind of walk you, the chat, the audience, through doing a couple of these things to kind of prove it to you of how your memory can be improved if you do some of these things by like actually doing it. On that subject, there's like other kind of trippy things that you can do, which is like, I'm sure everyone in the audience has done some version of this where like, you'll see those kind of optical illusions where there'll be like a ballerina kind of spinning this way. But then if you just think about it hard enough, you can like make it spin the other way or like back and forth. And there's like a lot of things like that. One of the coolest ones that I ever saw, this was back when I was working at the Citizen Science Lab in Brooklyn called GenSpace, which was the first citizen science lab in the world, which is really cool. But we had like some magicians come in and do some interesting like neuroscience magicianship stuff. And the one that stuck in my mind, I guess that's a call Aad Pun, I realized, that's just like really, really interesting, was basically you just kind of had on like, a blackboard or something like that, sort of like 3 overlapping circles, like 3 Venn diagram circles, right? And they were all the same. They were all like semi-translucent white. And it's basically all you got to do is you just look right at the center. And then how like if you can look somewhere but kind of like focus your attention somewhere else. My attention's over here, it's over here, even though I'm looking straight ahead. if you kind of do that when you were looking at this visual, whichever circle you were like moving your attention to would light up, but it's not actually lighting up. It's just like the way that the thing was designed was just so that just a slight like upregulation of your visual neurons, because you're kind of like shifting your attention over there, would actually make it visually change. So it's like it almost allowed you to like visually see how your attention is modulating your visual neurons, which was like really interesting.
There's I think that would make for a very, very good video. I think we should be doing more of those like visually interesting experiments to try to see like if the audience itself, like when they get involved, like are they experiencing the same thing as everybody else? Like even just people sharing their opinions and their experiences in the comments. Like it'd be cool to just build that study almost, you know. If people want to participate in that.
This might actually dovetail into like the science of consciousness as well, because what would be very interesting, just to briefly describe one of the things that neuroscientists are trying to figure out now is what's called the neural correlates of conscious experience. You know, what does it neurologically mean to experience the redness of red rather than just the perception of the wavelengths of red? What does it mean to have the feeling of it? It's qualia, right? And experiments that can sort of tease out where you can react to something without actually like acknowledging that you're perceiving it are kind of in that interesting gray area that might allow us to test some of those things. So anyway, what you just made me think of is some of the experiments that I'm currently running involving neuroscience involve triggering certain like sounds, like audio and visual stimulus that have neurological effects on the brain. But if we shift that into like ultrasound or like infrasound, you know, like where you're not actively hearing it, if we still see those neurological effects, but you don't actually report feeling or sensing anything, that could actually be really interesting. So I'm wondering if there's like anything that we could do like through YouTube that could sort of almost play around with these ideas. I have to think about it more, but it makes me think there's something weird that we might be able to do. Like if you combine it with something like, remember like the Yanni and Laurel thing, or the blue dress and the yellow dress or something like that. Like I feel like there's something involving that kind of stuff where if we play some sort of hidden frequency or something like that, it like makes people more likely to see the yellow dress or the blue dress or do that.
Yeah,
kind of stuff,
it would be cool to kind of a compilation of just, because it seems like over the years there's just every year, every couple of years, there's always one where it's like, do you hear this or do you hear this? Do you see this or do you see this? Like, and then there's just all of social media breaks. Like having a compilation video, just kind of going over all of them, I think would be kind of fun. Vsauce did a video a while back, which is really, really good. If those of you don't know, you should check this out. Like, it basically the video was on like, is my red the same as your red? Something similar along those lines, and how we don't necessarily know if we're perceiving the same color.
Yeah, that dips in.
That concept is still blowing my mind.
Yeah, that dips into something else that's even more fundamental. That's called the problem. It's related to the problem of other minds in philosophy, which is that's a broader thing, which is like, I know that I'm conscious, but I don't know that you're conscious. Like you could be like an automaton or a robot or something like that, right? Because I can't get inside your mind. But as sort of a consequence of that, which is trippy to think about, you know, I could be seeing the color blue the way that you see the color red, but because both of us have always been calling that blue our entire lives, it's just gonna like we're not gonna know that ever, which is just weird.
That's tripping me out. I don't like. I can't think about it too much because it like just bothers me.
Now, here's where you get sort of that interesting, you know, the qualia, the sense of the redness versus the redness, because the qualia might be different, but we would still agree on like, you know, 600 hertz of nanometer light or whatever is what I call blue. And like, we would definitely agree on that. We just wouldn't know that our lived experience of that color is different. The qualia, as philosophers would call it. Just one other idea that I thought was interesting in Dune that was touched on, is how the Bene Gesserits can control the sex of their offspring, and also do things like transmute poisons within their body. You know, they can drink a poison and turn it into something that's not poisonous, or do other things. I can't describe what without being a spoiler, But basically, that also kind of dovetails into just sort of potentially some future biological therapies that can allow us to have, greater, I guess you could say, agency and control over our own bodies. Not even just living longer, but there's a concept that's sometimes put out by transhumanists, etc., called morphological freedom, which basically just means, like, in the ideal future, people should be able to do whatever the heck they want with their body, turn yourself into a fish person or whatever, right? So these kind of ideas in Dune maybe just sort of like touch on that a little bit, this idea of having that kind of command over your body, which might be, I think that's much further off into the future, but eventually, if we can get things like, a colony of nanomachines able to like rearrange molecules in your body to your command or whatever, you theoretically should be able to do that sort of stuff, especially the sex of a child, just being able to determine, the X and Y chromosomes and that stuff. Doesn't sound too wild to think that someday that's possible.
Yeah, I this is obviously a different movie, but like the nanotechnology in Iron Man, or that Iron Man uses for his suit, I always thought was really, really fascinating. Just bringing your appearance just outwardly to be something completely different. That could be like the start of something where it's like not necessarily body modification, but it's like it's almost there.
Yeah, I'm actually working on some of this related kind of technology, not the nano side, but like the thing that, I don't know if this is a term that we don't like on this channel or not, because I know your feelings about blockchain, Pat, but like metaverse and this kind of stuff. One of the things that I think is potentially interesting is if you pair metaverse like technology with a brain computer interface, you can do the digital version of what you're saying. So I'm in a game, I'm in Fortnite with you, and because I think a certain way, I literally change the appearance of my avatar, right? So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that I feel like we can work on this kind of magical future in a sort of like decentralized way. Like we could figure out all of the interface of like, what is it like to build a technology that can update my appearance based on my thoughts or whatever, purely in the digital realm. Let other people figure out the nanotech stuff. But then if they figure out the nanotech stuff, you can pair that stuff together.
Yeah,
the
the first
right?
step is making a virtual world where you could just do and be anything, and then the next step after that, if people aren't satisfied with it, they're like, yeah, let's see if we could just do this in the real world. I think it seems like humans want to get to both ends.
I just want to shoot fireballs out of my hands.
That's all I want. Yeah, come on, guys. Like, let me just shoot fireballs. Come on. I wanted to. There's one comment that one of our friends wrote down here. Spice increases lifespan. Did I miss that part? Does it make you live longer?
It does. They don't really like hammer that home too much in the movies, and I can't remember if they really super underline that in the books or not. But yes, it absolutely does in the books. I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know that there's certain the future this I don't going into spoiler territory, but like so a warning. There's a lot of future how would I even say this, like predictions or something like that he's kind of going on and on about, and he's seeing these people from the far off future. How does he know what they look like? And like, does he make it there? Like, I just want to know, how does he know what these people?
Cannot discuss without going into super spoiler territory.
Oh, it's so frustrating. I just want to know. All right, we'll talk about it after this call, but I like legitimately need to know the answer to this.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something that I think was in an earlier chat that we didn't really discuss at length, which was how the spice helps people navigate the stars in the Dune universe. Because that, it might not seem like that makes sense. So the best way that I can think of it is it's almost, again, to draw a correlation between Star Wars and Dune. it's not that the spice gives you, because they mention it like, typical wormhole stuff, folding space, you jump from here to there, but then you might go, oh, like, what does the spice give you? The power to like rip holes in reality or something like that? As I understand it, if I'm remembering right, it's like, no, they have technology to do that. It's similar to, if you remember in Star Wars, why they needed to like punch the stuff in properly when they were going to go to hyperspace was because if they didn't, they might accidentally like hyperspace themselves like through an asteroid and destroy themselves. So they needed navigation computer to like chart out a course to make sure that they didn't do that. As I understand it, that's exactly what's going on in Dune. So like the people with the space folding machines need to take the spice so that they can chart out a proper path to not do that. So now that I'm thinking about it, that is again like totally like a inspired
Yeah.
homage from Star Wars.
I just want, and chat, let me know if because if you have seen Dune and you probably have seen Star Wars, I've been comparing the two, and I know that they're influenced by each other. It's not really a controversial opinion, but I feel like Star Wars has kind of dropped the ball in terms of like their newer movies, and then Dune comes along and is like, okay, we can make this thing look visually beautiful, story's cool, and interesting to watch. And maybe that's just because I know the Star Wars universe a little better and I've had more time to chew on it. But the Dune world is so confusing. I am trying to wrap my head around, like, there are so many things to remember just watching the movie, and at the end of it I'm like taking a bunch of notes and I'm like, okay, who are these guys, and like, what do they do, what's their past, and do these guys like each other? And someone said it's Game of Thrones in space.
Absolutely.
I need the spice to remember all of the things in Dune.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is one thing I think some credit that can be given to the new movies is I think they knew what to cut out, because none of that stuff that I was just talking about actually was in the new. This isn't a spoiler, really. Wasn't in the movies at all. There was none of this stuff about the spacing guild or like folding space or whatever. They really just kind of focused on sort of the, the protagonists and the villains and the main mission, which was like, try to, build the army, take revenge, etc. Obviously giving a glib analysis of it. But the point is that in the 80s version of the movie, they threw in every weird piece of thing. So like if you were confused by watching the new movie, Pat, you would have been like, what the hell's going on in the 80s movie?
It doesn't bode well, I think, for the franchise if there are several YouTube videos that's just like, here's everything you need to know about the Dune lore in like one video, and it's an hour. it's like such a meaty video that you need to dedicate multiple days to, because like you just got to process everything.
Yeah. One thing that's funny to think about too is I wonder how like Frank Herbert like thought himself of sort of the commentary that was coming out about the book and now, because he's not around now, but the point is that like it must be somewhat frustrating when you write something with a specific sort of message and then everybody takes the complete opposite of that message. So without getting into like details or making it political or whatever, as mentioned, especially in the 80s movie, you can watch it or consume it as a sort of triumphant rise to power hero story, and it very much has that sort of like, white savior, outsider comes in, saves the tribal people kind of thing, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that if you actually read the book or just like the explicit commentary, it's like the whole point of Dune was to literally to critique that. That's the whole point. So it must have been frustrating to have created a work that was like that, but then everybody reads it the exact opposite way you intended it.
This is like in Star Wars or any film, or like Loki is a perfect example. That man is not good. That man is not a good person, and everyone's like, yes, that guy's cool. Let's follow that guy. Let's learn more about that man. Like it happened when, and I remember this because it really bothered me. Like when The Dark Knight came out, and Heath Ledger's Joker was incredible. Like, it was a great performance. But people were like, he stole the show. I mean, people were enamored with this character, and they were like, yeah, he's not that bad when you really think about it. It's like, what are you talking about? this man is bad. But then you look at like these complicated characters. Paul in Dune is a troubled individual. Like, he's going through it, and you can slowly see his character break down over time. And now you have people who are watching these movies and going like, but he's not doing anything like that bad. But like, if you are really paying attention, like, he is crossing the borderline. Like, I think he's a little over it.
Absolutely. And again, this is where I think the newer Dune movies did a better job than the 80s movie, although again, I like the 80s movie, where they kind of really show that minor spoiler alert, minor prescience alert here, but they make it very clear that some of the protagonists are manipulating certain other characters in the story to achieve their own selfish ends, and I think they made that clear enough so that you can clearly see, like, maybe this isn't great, while you're watching the movie.
Yeah. All this to say, I think Dune points out the very it's a fact that I think not a lot of people like to think about, but humans are extremely complicated, and it doesn't matter if it's the year 10 million or 2024. People are very protective over resources and will fight each other on them for till the end of time. It doesn't even matter how advanced of a civilization. They're like this. It happened in Avatar. It happens in like every single like science fiction movie. It's like, oh, that planet has something, I want that. and the bad stuff always happens. It's never, and then people watch the movie and like, wow, that's epic. That's an amazing fantasy. And it's like, okay, but there's a reason why people have made this movie. People have made this movie because these things are real. Like, if you think that's exciting and awe-inducing, like, wait until you see the news.
Yeah, this is why I forget the name of the episode, but there was a Star Trek Next Generation episode that really has a great point on this. There's a meme about it with Patrick Stewart kind of talking about like the post-scarcity future and how it's all great. But long story short is in this episode, there's like a couple of people from like our timeline that were cryogenically frozen. And then they kind of pop out in Star Trek Next Generation land. And like, I remember the guys, he's like, I got to check my stock portfolio or whatever. Right. And Picard's like, none of that stuff matters anymore, man. Like, we have everything we need. Like, humanity is no longer defined by like selfish pursuits of things. We're all working together. And, he goes on for like a minute of kind of like this really wonderful vision of the future where we've solved kind of resource scarcity. So again, yes, whether we're going to get there or not, we'll see.
Well, that would be very nice. But yeah, so this is the part of Live Noggin, the brainstorming session, where if there's any video ideas that you, the viewer, the wonderful person watching, you think would make for a really, really cool episode, get them in the chat. Get any questions for Dear Blocko, which is a series that we're going to continue to dive into. We got more on the way. Any lore questions that you want to know about the Life Noggin world, get them in there. If you guys are interested in learning more about some of like the Dune history or like science of Dune, like let us know if you want to see a video on that. Subscribe for sure. And give this live stream a like, and the future videos that we're going to be doing, give that a like as well. And if you have any other things that you're thinking of after this video, any video ideas after this video, you can add us on Twitter at LifeNoggin. So yeah, Keith, where can people find you?
Sure, yeah, I'm just Keith Comito, my name on pretty much every social, Twitter, Telegram, etc. The charity, again, that powers Life Noggin is lifespan.io, so we're pretty much that on every...
Hey there, welcome to Live Noggin. I'm Pat, the co-creator of Life Noggin and Blocko's dad.
And I'm Keith, the president of Lifespan.io, the nonprofit that powers Life Noggin.
This is the Life Noggin podcast, where members of the Life Noggin team talk about the science behind movies, TV shows, and happenings in the news. We also brainstorm video ideas with the audience so the chat can shape future Life Noggin episodes.
Today, we're discussing the Dune franchise and all the different science topics related to it.
It's a fun and nerdy convo, and we actually realize there are so many video ideas that can come from the Dune movies. Spoilers ahead, just as a heads up. Enjoy this episode of Live Noggin. What if in a split second the Earth doubled in size? You know there is a reason your nose started to bleed. No single food has every nutrient you need. This is Life Noggin, an animated education channel that will satisfy even the most intense craving for information.
I guess to talk about, like, maybe we could talk about the spice a little bit and like what kind of like the analogs might be. So if I remember right, in the books, they said it's just sort of like tastes like cinnamon, it kind of looks like cinnamon. But obviously, it has all these interesting effects in the book. It could sort of give you heightened senses, sort of visions of the future. It turns your eyes blue. That's obviously like the key kind of visual. Interesting also to note that idea has been ripped off in a lot of other media. Like in Final Fantasy VII, the Mako turns your eyes kind of like that blue-green. So it's clearly inspired by Dune. And I hesitate to say that then there's real world analogs for exactly that, obviously, including the psychic ability